Hi, everybody. This is Eugene Popar, your host for the Hypnosis Masters Summit. And I have the great honor and privilege, blessing, I would even say, to have with us right now none other than Michael Yapko, who is a world legend, I would say, a world, one of the most renowned hypnotherapists in the world. He's a clinical psychologist and a marriage and family therapist who is from residing in South Carolina. Dr. Yapko is a fellow of the American Psychological Association, a member of the International Society of Hypnosis, and a fellow of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. He's the recipient of Lifetime Achievement Awards from the American Psychological Association, the International Society of Hypnosis, and the Milton H. Erickson Foundation for his many contributions to the field of psychotherapy and clinical hypnosis. Dr. Yapko is an author of 16 books and editor of 3 others, as well as is author of dozens of books, book chapters, and journal articles. And his focus, this is very important, everyone. His focus is on wellness, not on pathology. And he emphasizes that this is not simply a semantic issue. All right, this is very important. Focusing on patterns in people's problems process rather than the specific problems themselves, the content, and learning to recognize how people maintain their issues rather than speculate why. So in his own words, therapy isn't just about feeling better, it's about being better. Dr. Yapko, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So I'm so excited, to have this time with you here. And I wanted to ask you because you're saying it's so important to actually focus on the how and not on the what. Can you explain a little bit more? What do you mean by this? The how. Why is the how important, not the what? Because most of the time people come and say, I have this problem.
Well, it's pretty typical when people have a problem that they want to know why. And so they start looking for explanations. And of course, you can make up any explanation that you want to, and you can make explanations that sound pretty good. They sound deep and they sound philosophical, and they're very profound ways of thinking about human experience. But they may not be true, and they certainly don't lend themselves easily to clinical intervention. So when I talk about the how, I'm much more interested in the steps someone follows, the sequence someone follows that leads them to develop the kinds of problems that they have. So if you like, I can give you a pretty simple example. Take something like an airplane phobia, somebody who is afraid of flying. Mm-hmm. And here you have a very reliable strategy that people follow. I do, up until the pandemic, I was flying almost every week of the year somewhere in the world. And for me, flying is a very comfortable experience. I get settled into a seat, and the first thought that goes through my mind is that for the next 14 hours, I don't have to take any phone calls or respond to any emails, and I get to relax. And then I look across the aisle and hear somebody who is pounding down scotches, and they're obviously very, very anxious. And I used to get up and go over to them and ask them, mm-hmm. What are you doing inside yourself there that generates so much anxiety? And this is what I mean by the how. It wouldn't matter if this person was 70 years old or 20 years old. It wouldn't matter if they were a busy professional in a business suit or somebody who's riding the waves as a surfer with just a bathing suit and a tank top on. Mm-hmm. The content isn't what mattered. Who it was didn't even matter. What mattered was they all shared the same process, the same how of they would picture themselves sitting in this airplane. They would picture the airplane taking off. Then they would visualize the wings falling off the plane and the plane going down in flames while everyone is yelling and screaming. And then there's just twisted metal and body parts all over the hillside. And then they have the internal experience as if all those images are imminent, as if those things are really going to happen. And so that's the how someone generates an airplane phobia. And if you ask, well, why would somebody generate those kinds of images? It's certainly not based on past history. They've never been in a plane crash before.
Yeah.
It's all about thinking about what could happen, what might happen, what may happen, and then responding to it as if it's going to happen, because they don't have any particular skill in being able to distinguish what's possible from what's probable. And so that's the how. For as long as anybody generates that kind of sequence of terrible images and places themselves right in the middle of it, they're going to have an airplane phobia. And why they would do that, why think about plane crashes? Who doesn't? Even though I fly comfortably, as soon as I get in onto the airplane, they start giving us the safety talk. That here's what happens if the power goes out. Here's what happens if the oxygen runs out. Here's what happens if. So they're telling you this plane can crash. They're telling you this plane can have problems. So it's very different how someone responds to that if they don't have the ability to separate out what's realistic from what's possible, what's probable from what's possible. That's what I mean by the how. So it's no longer about why the person has the phobia. You know, it's not that the plane is symbolic of a loss of control, or that the plane represents some unconscious issue from their childhood, or all the things that sound so deep but don't really have anything to do with how that person develops the problem.
Yeah. And, you touched on, this, sounds so deep, this little topic here. Are things very complex and difficult, or is it really the human mind is just very simple to work with? And, most of the time we kind of make a convolution out of a situation, and we make basically the bubble to be way bigger than it actually is.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on that?
These are the paradoxes of human experience, that complex experiences can be made simple, simple experiences can be made complicated. And that's why the way that a therapist thinks about problems makes all the difference in the world. It's one of the first lessons I learned from one of my greatest teachers and mentors was Jay Haley, who, when I went into supervision with him to talk about cases I was working on, it's one of the first lessons he taught me was never define a problem in unsolvable terms. And that's such an important lesson, because we can easily make problems more complicated just by our own philosophies and interests, or we can make problems simpler and easier to solve depending on our perspective. And I think that, over the course of the last 50 years of clinical practice, for me, therapy has become a simpler process rather than a more complicated one. And part of that is because the problems that people present are repetitive. I hear the same problems over and over and over again. The names change and the faces change and the circumstances change, but the way that the person generates the problem is pretty much the
process.
Yeah, it's the process. And so I talked about some of that in my newest book, Process-Oriented Hypnosis, but it's the paradox that you're unique, just like everybody else. And the kinds of things that we are asked to treat, the way that we think about them determines how we go about treating them, which is why you can have this person who does hypnosis and you can have this person who does hypnosis, and they're doing very different things. And they're using the hypnosis in very different ways. So that is one of the things that I'm always encouraging therapists to think about.
Yeah.
What are your philosophies? What is your way of explaining why people have the problems that they have? And what is your orientation? And how does your way of thinking about problems, how's that a reflection of you rather than being a reflection of the problem? And I think that that's a really important point, because most therapists get trained in a way of thinking, whatever framework they learn, whether it's a cognitive behavioral approach or a psychodynamic approach. And then that's the perspective that they bring to their therapy sessions, as if that perspective is, first of all, as if it's true.
Yeah.
But second of all, as if it's going to be equally effective with everybody. And of course it isn't.
Of course. Would you support people having more tools so they could be more diversified, or actually have less techniques but go deeper with those? What is your take on that?
Of course, this depends on how people view techniques. And a lot of trainings that people go through, they're learning techniques, whether it's literally learning to read scripts to people or whether it's learning a particular technique.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the power isn't in the technique. What makes a technique valuable is the person's ability to respond to it.
Yeah.
And if the context and if the relationship doesn't support the technique isn't going to go anywhere. And so this is what makes therapy a little bit more complicated, is that if all it was techniques, then everybody would get better. But it's about how people learn, how people think, how people organize their subjective experience, how they form relationships with a therapist, what their expectations are, what their past history has been, what their learning style is, what their cognitive style is. And that's what takes so long to master hypnosis, if there is such a thing as mastering hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I've been practicing hypnosis every day of my professional life for the last 50 years, and I still feel like I understand about this much of it. And I'm very mindful that the more you learn, the less you realize you know.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to me, because not long before Milton Erickson passed away, one of my colleagues asked him, "So, Dr. Erickson, how long do you think it should take to learn hypnosis?" And Erickson's answer was, "Well, I've been practicing hypnosis now for more than 50 years. I've written more than a dozen books. I've published more than 100 articles. I've treated thousands of people, and I think I'm starting to understand it." And that's wisdom. That's wisdom.
Yeah. And humbleness at the same time. Yeah.
It's the recognition that every case is different. Obviously, there are similarities, there are overlaps. You know, I've been talking about the process side of it. That's where the overlaps are, but there are also the differences. And you know, every person brings a different history with them, a different set of expectations with them. And all of those things that really make a difference in the quality of their response.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Yapko, let me ask you, in your own words, how would you describe or define hypnosis? What would be your definition of it?
Well, I provide a definition that I like in my book, Trance Work. I'll try and capture the essence of it here.
Yes.
To me, what hypnosis is about is a special type of relationship that involves a quality of focusing and introducing possibilities that rely on personal factors, interpersonal factors, contextual factors that help mobilize hidden resources for the purpose of therapeutic change. So I think of it as a goal-oriented kind of process, that whenever you do hypnosis, there's a reason, there's something that you're trying to accomplish. But it really speaks to the hidden resources that people have. And to me, that's one of the most important parts in thinking about how you think about hypnosis. That anybody who practices hypnosis starts with the idea that people have more abilities than they realize. And so it's about creating this context of self-discovery where people can be guided to discover resources that they didn't even know they had. You can imagine what it's like when somebody, for example, has been in physical pain, suffering, and then they see someone who practices hypnosis who is able to provide them with pain relief. And this person, up until that moment, had no idea that they had the ability to influence or regulate the level of pain in their body.
Yeah.
And it's that quality of discovery and that quality of growing as a person through the recognition of more resources that, to me, defines hypnosis. So it's not exactly a short definition.
Yeah.
If I was going to give just a short definition, I would say it's a quality of relationship that encourages people to discover hidden resources that can be directed for therapeutic change.
Beautiful, beautiful. And another question I was just getting as I was listening to you, when working with clients, when using hypnosis to help people with whatever goals they have, what would you say is like the most important factor or ingredient for a successful intervention?
It's hard to pin down one single ingredient because this is part of the complexity of it, is there are multiple factors that influence what happens. But certainly if I were to say one specific factor that makes the most difference, I would say it's the role of expectancy. And
of the patient client.
On the part of the client, that when we look at the relationship between the quality of a client's expectations and how they ultimately do in therapy, we see that expectations influence every phase of treatment. So your expectations influence whether you will go for help. If my expectations are negative, if I believe that nobody can help me, then why would I go for help? So it determines whether someone will go for help. It determines the rate of the person's recovery, whether they will recover quickly or slowly. How can I recover quickly if I don't believe recovery is even possible? So it shapes the rate of recovery. It shapes the person's level of cooperation with the treatment plan. Why would I do the homework you give me? Why would I read the books you suggest? Why would I do the assignments you give me if I believe they're never going to make a difference anyway? So it shapes the person's treatment compliance or cooperation. It determines whether someone is going to recover fully or only partially. And it determines whether someone is more or less likely to relapse. So the quality of expectations is a very powerful factor in every phase of treatment.
Wonderful. So here, this raises two questions, because one question would be, if somebody comes with low expectation of whatever the result will be, how can we help them raise those expectations? And so that's like, I would say, on the positive side. But then you also have clients who come in with some outlandish expectations where they think, oh, I'm gonna, be like that, and you're gonna put me to sleep, and when I'm waking up, I'm done, and you fixed me while I'm sleeping.
Sure.
How do you deal with that?
It's a good question. For the person who has low expectations or no expectations, expectations influence motivation dramatically. And typically the reason people will have such low expectations is because they have tried before and they have failed, and then they have tried again and then they have failed again. And so they have reached the conclusion that because they've expended effort before and it hasn't gone anywhere, therefore the problem must not be solvable. And so it's actually pretty easy for me to be able to start to point out to them things that they haven't tried, things that they haven't experienced, pathways to making things happen that would never have occurred to them, which is why they're there in the first place. The reason you're here is you're hoping that I'll be able to say something and do something that would never have occurred to you in a million years that can make a difference. That's why you're here, and here's what's realistic to expect about that. And so the other part of that issue is making use of hypnosis for a very specific purpose called compartmentalization or the use of dissociation. Can I help you separate your feelings from your actions? Can you have the feeling that something's not going to work, but still take the action as if it might? Can I motivate you to be willing to try, even if your expectations aren't very high? And this is how people surprise themselves. This is how later they say, well, I didn't expect that to work, but it did. And I feel better now. So that's the dealing with the low expectation side of it. And dealing with the unrealistic expectation side of it, to be able to define from the time the person walks in the door, from the time they establish the appointment, what is reasonable to expect. And maybe have them do some research, have them talk to other people who have been through the experience successfully. And were they really asleep? Did they not know what was going on? And what do they find out? But more important than that, to be able to say, do you want to be an active collaborator in the process? Do you want this to be because you did it, or do you want it to be because I did it? Do you want to learn the skills that are going to serve you for a lifetime, or do you want to be a slave for the rest of your life? How do you want to live? And it's really encouraging people to say, yeah, I want to learn the skills. Okay, you're not going to do that when you're asleep. The whole idea here is I need you to be a full partner in this process. I'm going to be the one that introduces ideas to you, but you're the one that's going to bring them to life. You're the one that's going to make them work.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure you've had your fair share of clients who said, I don't want to think about that problem anymore. It's, too painful for me. So you, doctor, do your thing and, take my pain away without me having to do anything about it. I don't want to have any part in it. It's all you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's really my point, is that is the quote unquote victim mentality. The person feels like this is beyond me. I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And nobody gets better by declaring themselves a victim. So, I can empathize with that and say, I understand why you'd rather not think about it. But the work here is how to get from where you are to where you want to be. How does this get solved? And it doesn't get solved magically. There are going to be steps that you follow that make it possible for you to get where you want to go, but you've got some things to do between here and there.
Yeah, beautiful. So when you're working with hypnosis, what are the bits of information that you collect from a client which will guide you into which kind of approach to have with that particular client? What are you listening to? What are you paying attention to from the client? What is like the most important cues that you're looking for in a client?
When I'm interviewing someone before the hypnosis begins, there's really two pathways I'm going down at the same time. One pathway is I'm listening for resources. I'm listening for skills, strengths that the person has that they may not know they have, but things that I recognize that requires some skill. So for example, this person might happen to mention to me that they moved from one city to another city to take a new job. Now that's just a little interesting piece of information, but if you think about it, think about the skills that go into preparing and making a move, of being willing to uproot yourself and go someplace new, to leave behind your old job, leave behind people that have been your friends and neighbors there, what it's like to have to go through all of your things and decide what you're going to keep because it's still important, and what you're going to let go of because it used to be important, but it's not important anymore. And then you move to this new place and you start building your environment the way you want it to be. And you learn where the grocery store is, you learn where the dry cleaners, and you make all of these incredible adjustments if you think about the skills that go into it. So I'm always listening for what are the kinds of experiences this person has had that reflect particular skills that I'm going to be able to make use of in the hypnosis session. And then the second avenue that I'm going down is what are the ways that this person has managed to stay the same all this time? How do you meet new people, read new books, read magazine articles, watch television shows, have conversations with people, and still be the same? How do you hold on to a problem for a year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? Yeah. And so, again, it's how does someone keep a problem going is as important a question to me as how does somebody change? So how does somebody change? How does somebody stay the same? Those are two sides of the same coin, and I'm interested in both sides.
And you're interested in the how of both sides, in the process for each.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I thought you were saying something. Okay. Now, when you started doing hypnosis, what prompted you to start, practicing learning hypnosis in the first place?
Well, this is a long time ago, Eugene. When I was 19 years old, I was a psychology student at University of Michigan, and the psychology department was a very traditional, psychodynamic, very Freudian kind of department. And students were basically told, don't bother to study hypnosis because there's nothing there that's worth anything. Freud abandoned it for a reason. So I got an announcement in the mail of a psychologist who was going to be offering a 2-day workshop on clinical hypnosis. And so I immediately signed up for it, which tells you something about my personality. And I wanted to know for myself, what is this about? I had never studied hypnosis. The only hypnosis I had ever seen were silly stage shows. And here was somebody who was talking about clinical applications. And as someone who was going to be a clinician, I wanted to know, what is this about? So I went to the workshop, and it was the first day was good information. But it was the second day that was really important to me because he asked for a volunteer to do a clinical demonstration with. And a woman volunteered. She came up on stage, and I was sitting in the front row because I wanted to see this up close and hear everything and not miss anything. And she told the very sad story about having been in a very serious car accident 3 years earlier, and that she was very badly injured. She'd had multiple surgeries, many broken bones, many lacerations of organs. And she had healed pretty well, except for her leg continued to be in very severe pain. And she had had many treatments, from medications to acupuncture to physical therapy, you name it, and nothing helped her. And the pain was so severe that it limited her life. She couldn't work nearly as much, so she was having financial problems and she couldn't serve her clients. She happened to be a therapist. And it was just, her story was very sad, and it really touched everybody, I think. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, what can this guy possibly say to her that's going to make any difference in her life at all? This is, in a way it's silly because it's going to create false hope, and she's going to have one more treatment that didn't work. And this is what's going on in my mind. So he starts the hypnosis session with her, and the hypnosis induction that he does is a pretty straightforward, picture yourself in a relaxed place, nothing special. And then after the induction, he's, got her where she's paying attention. She's clearly engaged with what he's talking about. And then he has her start visualizing the pain in her leg as if it's turning into a very dark, thick liquid that's going to start flowing down her leg. And it's going to flow down her leg and out of her big toe and into her shoe. And then it's going to spill out of her shoe onto the floor and just be a puddle of pain on the floor. So I'm listening to this guy talking about this, and I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy talk. I have no idea what this guy is trying to do here. Of course, I didn't know anything about hypnosis, so I didn't know how to evaluate it. I didn't know how to judge it. I had no idea what he was doing or why he was doing it. But then you look at this woman and her face has totally changed. I mean, all the lines are gone, and I thought something is clearly happening here, and I can't wait to find out what it is. So finally, the session's over after about 45 minutes or so. And when he finishes the session and he invites her to sit up and open her eyes, she doesn't say anything for about a minute. And when you're just sitting there waiting for a minute, seems like a long time. But finally, after about a minute or so, she starts crying. And then she says to him, "This is the first time in 3 years that I have been pain-free." And I was just amazed. And my thought was, I have got to learn how to do this.
Yeah.
And so I was 19, and that was when I started my training. And here I am now, almost 50 years later, and I have still been training and still been learning. But that was.
And I'm sure you have hundreds of such stories yourself now.
I can say that I've had a few successes along the way, sure.
For sure. Now, when working with clients, you have the two things that you're paying attention to, and you have clients who come to you and they say, "Oh, I've seen stage hypnosis and I've seen those guys doing all those things, and I don't want you to make me bark like a dog or whatever." So from this perspective, stage hypnosis has had a bad rap for many years, with the good and the bad. What is your take on stage hypnosis? Is it good? Is it helpful? Is it detrimental to the profession? What do you think?
My attitude about stage hypnosis is that it makes taking hypnosis seriously as a clinical tool very difficult for people. Mm-hmm. And if someone gets attracted to it, then they seek out hypnosis for magic. That I saw them do this on stage, why can't you do that to me? So it ends up creating unrealistic expectations. And that's if someone's attracted to it, but most people are turned off by it. They think it's mind control. They think it's somehow going to be demeaning to the client. That's going to somehow put them in a one-down position. And for people who are clinical trained professionals, they don't want their client to be one down, waiting to be fixed. They want the person to be an active partner in the treatment process. Mm-hmm. So I have never in my entire life seen a stage hypnosis show that I thought was useful to the clinical profession.
I understand. When working with clients, would you say is it more effective Okay, let me change the question. Many people have heard about hypnosis and also about self-hypnosis. When is it appropriate to use self-hypnosis?
Well, if you're going to treat a client with hypnosis, you want this person to be able to reproduce that quality of focus, that quality of being able to engage themselves in the problem-solving process. So from that standpoint, teaching self-hypnosis should be a part of every treatment. If what we want to do is encourage independence and independent problem solving, if what we want to do is empower people to recognize that they have this capacity within themselves to be able to focus and use their resources in a more goal-oriented way, that's what helps people feel like they have more control over their lives. That's what helps people feel better about themselves, which is what we're trying to do. So
Yeah.
teaching people self-hypnosis to me is a standard part of any good treatment.
And you're doing that like in the first session, or is it down the line somewhere in further, encounters with a client?
Every time I do a hypnosis session with someone, it's recorded. And the client is given the recording. And so they have the opportunity to re-experience the full hypnosis session from the recording. And in the recording, I will also say, so in the future, when you're doing hypnosis, sometimes you can listen to the recording, sometimes you can do it on your own. As if you're listening to the recording or using the techniques that I've used on yourself to guide yourself into a comfortable place and focus yourself. So I'm encouraging both, listening to it again through the recording, practicing on your own so that you're not always only able to do hypnosis when you're in my office or when you're listening to a recording.
Is there something from your experience that you'd say it's a taboo in hypnosis?
There are lots of taboos in hypnosis. You have something more specific in mind that you wanted to comment on?
Well, I mean, some people say, thou shall not speak of hypnosis, or stuff like that. It's like, because it has a bad rap. So that'll be one take on it.
The word hypnosis has a lot of baggage attached to it.
Yeah.
And so, what's interesting is you can say to someone, so do you want to do hypnosis? And they go, no. And then you say, well, what about doing some focusing and some relaxation? Well, that would be fine. So people may object to the word hypnosis, but I've never had any object to the process of hypnosis. And again, it's always about how you introduce it to people.
Yeah.
I have a really simple way of introducing it. When I've been interviewing the client, at some point I'll say something to them like, I've been listening to you now describing the problems that you're experiencing, and it's obvious to me that you want things to change. No one ever says, no, that's not it. They go, well, yeah. And I'll say, and you've been so focused on these kinds of feelings, and you've been focused on these kinds of memories. And wouldn't it be helpful to start to shift your focus to something more helpful, more meaningful? And to help you shift your focus, sit back, close your eyes. Here we go.
Beautiful. That's a beautiful way of, twisting it around for them, because actually I've read about a study at some point. They took this big group, like they had the control group and the test group. And people actually segregated themselves in one of the two groups based on, do you believe in hypnosis or you don't believe in hypnosis, right? So they created the two groups. And then they used the same text. And for the people who believed in hypnosis, they used the word hypnosis. For those who didn't believe, they used the word imagination or something similar. And people who did believe in hypnosis, who proclaimed that they believe in hypnosis, actually they were more responsive to suggestions than this other group, the control group. And the only word which was changed throughout the whole text was just hypnosis with imagination.
Yeah, that study has gotten a lot of publicity, and even more recent studies that have come out that suggest that by using the word hypnosis, you get a better response from people. that also challenges directly a lot of the research. Really, a researcher by the name of Ted Barber, T.X. Barber, who is very famous in the hypnosis world, was the first one to really question, do we need to use the word hypnosis? And he used the term imagination and got the same level of response from people.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of I'm going to do hypnosis and your arm is going to become numb, Barber would say, just imagine your arm becoming numb, and he would get the same level of analgesia or anesthesia as people who called it that. So
Yeah.
as he moved further into his career, whenever he wrote about hypnosis, he would always put the word hypnosis in quotation marks
Wow.
because he didn't really think there was such a thing. And then you look at the people who saw it differently,
Yeah.
who thought that there really is a thing called hypnosis and that one day we'll be able to measure it. The so-called hypnosis purists,
Yeah. Yeah.
people like Ernest Hilgard and Andre Weizenhofer, who were absolutely sure that one day we would be able to identify a specific neurological state called hypnosis. Well, that hasn't happened yet. And my guess is that isn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But this is an opinion. We'll see what the science eventually tells us.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. We certainly can't say, we can't look at a brain scan and say there's hypnosis.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned something about hypnosis, and in the world of hypnosis there is the direct or the indirect hypnosis, the paternal and maternal approach. What's your take on that? How do you view this?
Every approach has potential value.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not the approach that you use, it's the client's response to the approach that you use. What people need to understand is the power of hypnosis is not in your words. Your words don't mean anything if the client doesn't respond to them. And so the same is true with an approach. Whatever kind of approach you take, it's up to the client to decide whether they like that approach and whether they're willing to respond to that approach.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that there are some people who like it better when you tell them very clearly what you want them to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other clients that as soon as you tell them what to do, they go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So it's not the words and it's not the way you convey them. That's part of it. But it's up to the client to decide what they're able to respond to and what they're willing to respond to. And that's what makes the interaction more complicated. If I could just tell people what to do, the world would be different.
And you as a therapist should have the acumen, you have the ability to distinguish what is this person in front of you responding best to, direct or indirect, do this, or you might want to do that.
Exactly right. That's what good training is about, is that you're comfortable using any and all approaches and can choose your approach based on what you think the client is most likely to respond to. Mm-hmm. And the client provides cues all the time about what they're willing to respond to, whether they're willing to follow you or whether they're not. Clients walk into my office, and some clients walk in and sit down wherever they want, and other clients walk into my office and stand there and wait for me to tell them where to sit. I mean, you're starting to learn right away.
Oh, I love this one. This is so good. This is perfect. Yeah.
You're starting to learn right away whether this person is going to follow themselves or whether they're going to follow you. And that's what helps you choose your approach.
Right. So right from the get-go, you kind of have an idea how you should proceed forward with this person just by watching them step 3 steps inside of your office.
It's all about observing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Is there something that you would not advise to use hypnosis with, some sort of a mental, emotional, psychological illness or situation?
we don't treat diagnostic labels, we treat people. And every
I love
person
this.
has resources, every person has relevant experiences, every person has goals, every person has expectations, but there isn't anybody that I can think of that I wouldn't want to have a meaningful conversation with.
Mm. I'm asking this because some people say, well, we shouldn't use hypnosis with schizophrenia or paranoia because those people, they already have such a exacerbated imagination, they cannot tell what is real or what is not. So if you do hypnosis, it's going to make it even worse. That's why I was putting that question.
Well, I've heard that my whole professional life, that you shouldn't do hypnosis with psychotic people, and you shouldn't do hypnosis with borderline people, and you shouldn't do, I was taught you shouldn't do hypnosis with depressed people.
Okay.
Depression was something you shouldn't treat with hypnosis. And all of these are old ideas that are based on misconceptions about the nature of the disorder and misconceptions about the nature of hypnosis. Now, obviously, the way that you would approach someone who's schizophrenic would be different than the way that you would approach someone who isn't.
Yeah.
So if you have somebody who's paranoid, how do you acknowledge and utilize that paranoia? But it doesn't mean you shouldn't spend time with them and use focused communication to teach them some pretty important skills, such as reality testing. How does somebody learn to distinguish what they manufacture in their head versus what's really out there in the world?
Yeah.
So I worked lockup for 3 years, working with schizophrenics and other people who had various psychotic disorders, and I was using hypnosis all the time. But it didn't look the same as talking to somebody who's fully intact, where I can say, sit down, close your eyes, and now I'm going to talk for 20 minutes. It's not going to be the same. In the same way, somebody who has an attention deficit disorder, the hypnosis is going to look different than when you're dealing with somebody who's in a lot of physical pain, which is going to look different than when you're dealing with somebody who's in the middle of a panic attack. Hypnosis is always going to need to be adjusted to the nature of the person you're dealing with. But those old misconceptions come out of when you have one approach, here's my approach, and then you discover all the people who can't respond to it.
Yeah, and it's the people's problem, not my approach's problem. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Yapko, what would be your parting words for people who are watching this presentation right now? What would you say to everybody who is interested in hypnosis, maybe wanting to start to practice, maybe are practicing already? What would you tell them?
That when you're in the position of influence, when people perceive you as an expert, when people are desperate and looking to solve problems and reduce their level of suffering, the responsibilities of being a well-trained clinician are very great responsibilities and obviously need to be taken very seriously. And hypnosis is a very rich and very deep field that has a lot to offer. And from my perspective, if I was in charge of clinical training programs all over the world, I would want every person who's going to do therapy to learn hypnosis, to learn about the value of communication, the value of relationship, the value of introducing ideas to people. And so, I would want to encourage whoever is listening to this to continue to learn the range of ways hypnosis can be applied to reduce human suffering and to enjoy the process, because every step of the way you learn things in hypnosis that will be amazing to you as well. And it's really personally enriching to be able to recognize that human potential is more than just an empty phrase, that human potential really is remarkable. And hypnosis helps activate that human potential. So I would encourage people to keep learning, keep growing, keep enjoying.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Yapko. Please tell us, where can people find you? Where can they get in touch with you? How can they learn more from you?
Well, you had mentioned that I'm in South Carolina. I'm actually in San Diego, California.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. But the easiest and best thing for people to do is go to my website, yapko.com. That's spelled YAPKO.com. And that's where people will find my teaching schedule. It's where people will find my books and articles and blogs and all kinds of materials and links to other websites and so forth. So that's where people can learn more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So everybody, what you have to do now, go ahead and take your notebook. I hope you took a lot of notes. I took a lot of notes. I have a whole page of notes. So share your thoughts and ideas with us, if you will, in the Facebook group. And then we'll take a quick break, and we'll see you after the break with another presentation, or we'll see you tomorrow with another presentation. Dr. Yapko, thank you so much again for your time and your presence.
I hope everybody will enjoy the rest of the meetings.
I'm sure they will.